Welcome to another edition of the e-commerce report. Me, Mia Lindicke, I'm your host, and our CEO, Steve Orenstein. Steve, you recently had a very bad experience. Just to summarize it, you ordered a bike and it took 3 attempts before it was delivered. If you haven't watched that video at your doorstep, please go and watch it on our social media platforms. But Steve, I believe there is now a little bit of an update. Tell us, what is the latest development?
Well, the bike's arrived, which is great news, and yeah, it's a great product. It's a Peloton bike, so it's really great. But I did receive a follow up from them in terms of doing that customer survey, which I think is always important, and particularly in delivery, is knowing whether that customer's had a good or bad delivery experience. I think when you can connect the moment that delivery actually is delivered and then requesting that review, that's the ideal situation. In this situation, it was delayed by a few days, but look, they're still asking to find out sort of what that experience was like. So that's a good step in the right direction.
Let's dive straight into our first story as we wrap the e-commerce news for you of this week. Something that happened just today. There was quite a scramble during rush hour for retail traders, and it wasn't for the good reason that you would imagine. It was actually, there was a technical glitch in the system, and Australians couldn't actually make electronic purchases with their credit cards. That obviously caused a huge headache for all of these retailers. So what do you think about these widespread outages, Steve? I mean, something like that could be really painful for a small business.
Yeah, no, definitely. So this was impacting customers that were using the Square payment device. And so Square had an outage, which was this morning, which went on for a number of hours. And so I think what this highlights is, small businesses and retailers, they're very reliant on obviously being able to take payment. And obviously, if you can't take payment, particularly with credit card in this day and age, your business will stop, and there's a substantial amount of revenue that can be lost. So I would always think about, if that's a point of failure in your business, having a backup solution and having another credit card provider that is available that can be able to take credit cards, because ultimately, computers break, system failures do happen. And regardless of the amount of redundancy that someone like Square would have in place, sometimes things happen that are outside of different controls. It was only probably, maybe even a year ago, one of the other payment providers here in Australia called Tyro had an outage that actually went on for a number of different days, if not even weeks in certain instances. So definitely, this is not something that's just unique to Square. It can happen with any payment provider, and so having a backup is going to be really important, and probably not that expensive to have that backup in place.
Absolutely. It's a small price to pay, but diversifying your payment options, I think this is essential. A lot of companies might now be reviewing their options after today. What lessons can e-commerce businesses draw from this?
Yeah, I mean, I think, generally from an e-commerce point of view, having that one payment provider is probably fine. From a retail point of view, I think more often than not, I've heard more of these retail providers having issues, and that's primarily because there is a bit of hardware that's involved, and the complication between the hardware and the software and the communication that goes between that. So having a backup there and using an independent, not just a different device, but actually another company where you can actually still take payments, completely, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Let's now chat about Australia Post. I know that they are raising their stamp prices by 25% from next year. Well, it's not actually being implemented, but they have they've given this draft to the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission. So don't stress now; it's still up for public review. But this is going to be damning to businesses and to consumers. They've now got an option to go and make their submissions. What do you think about these increases? 25%, that's a lot.
Well, look, I think it's okay. I mean, it's only for envelopes that have been sent and letters. So, if you're still sending, I can't remember the last time I actually sent a letter. And so businesses need to be shifting away from sending letters. It's not good for the environment. All these letters can be sent electronically. And so we need to be, have motivation to do that. I think it makes a lot of sense that this price hike actually does happen. And this comes back to, I guess, the fundamentals of logistics and people understanding the logistics. People think, because it's an envelope versus delivering a large box, an envelope should be substantially cheaper. Well, in fact, it's actually, generally about the same amount of work. The real cost in logistics is actually how long it takes the driver to actually deliver. And if you think about carrying a box versus carrying an envelope, it's very similar. It's slightly different in that, a delivery driver delivering letters can actually take a lot more letters in one particular go. And so there are some savings there, but ultimately letter volumes have reduced dramatically. And so the amount of letters that a driver or someone on a bike is actually delivering in a day is substantially less than what they were doing 10 years ago. And so it's every one of those deliveries makes up the revenue that driver's actually earning or generating for the company. And so if they've gone from being able to deliver 500 letters in a day now to only delivering 100, that's a substantial reduction in the amount of letters and a substantial reduction in the amount of revenue that Australia Post is making. And this is why they've had the huge loss that has actually incurred. It's their letter business that's causing this. So they need to do something. They need to do something drastic. I think a price hike is one thing, but I also think it means actually reducing the number of days that they're actually delivering letters. They don't need to be delivering these every single day. Could move to every second day and third day. I think it makes a lot of sense in doing that.
Yeah. What do you think about the ACCC asking businesses and customers for their input? I mean, you can imagine what all of them are going to say. Most of them are going to say.
I mean, it's kind of bizarre. Like, they're asking people what they think about a price increase. I mean, every single person is going to respond back and say, this is a terrible idea. I mean, I don't understand why they're asking. It's a complete waste of money that the ACCC is spending on asking people. And, it's just bizarre. I mean, obviously they're going to get all these people saying that this is ridiculous and they shouldn't be increasing the price and 25% is too much. But really, when you think about the business model, Australia Post, their revenue has dropped dramatically for delivering of letters. And so they need to make changes to their business model. And if they were a commercial operating business, these changes would have been made many, many years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. But how do you then think that these increases will align with their strategy to modernize the business? That's something that they were quite specifically out about last week when they had that briefing.
Yeah, look, I'm sure that what their strategy is around this is they're wanting to reduce the number of days that they're actually delivering letters. But then also what they're doing is they're increasing the price and they're trying to force people to stop using letters, stop sending letters. And so people are going to be more motivated. The more this actually goes up, the less letters are going to be sent. Then that's going to increase or improve their argument in terms of being able to say, hey, look, letter volumes have again gone down by another 50%. We need to make some changes around how this actually operates. So I think it's heading in the right direction. It's taking longer than what it should. But they're having to appease the government in this process, I think.
Yeah. One of the biggest stories of this week must surely be the FlexSport CEO, Dave Clark. He is stepping down. He was also the former Amazon executive. And he said in an interview that FlexSport is redirecting its focus on global trade. But there is something odd here. FlexSport founder, Ryan Peterson, he is now taking over. And it was within minutes he announced it. The sudden leadership reshuffle, what do you think about that, Steve?
Look, it's interesting. I mean, so for those people that don't know, like, FlexSport is a big US business. It's raised billions of dollars now, and so quite a substantial startup. It's raised a lot of money, and their business model was always designed originally around shifting product from different countries. And so essentially being able to move product, and originally started from moving product, I think, from Hong Kong into the US. And it was around consolidation of product in Hong Kong so that they could have many e-commerce businesses put all their products together. It would reduce the overall cost of that shipment getting into the US. And that business has expanded rapidly. It's grown really quickly. It added real value to customers when doing cross-border transactions or cross-border movements of freight. What's then happened is, this business has, now been running for some time. They brought in a CEO to take over and running that business. And the CEO that's come on board, ex-Amazon, a lot of experience working with Amazon, started with Amazon back in 1999. And so this is just after Amazon actually IPO'd, and it's gone through the growth of what Amazon has actually seen. Now, to put it in perspective, FlexSport has a business with about 3,000, 4,000 employees compared to Amazon, which is obviously a much, much larger business today. And so different people and different management is required at different scales of a business. And potentially maybe their strategy didn't align to the actual overall business. Over this year, there's been a number of changes to the FlexSport business in terms of it was doing a lot of cross-border delivery. Now what it's actually been focused on is actually last mile delivery. And then that was seen through the acquisition that they did. Shopify acquired a business back in 2022 called Deliv, or Delivery, and with double R at the end. And then they, less than a year later, then they went on to sell this business, and that business actually got sold to Flexport. And so they took over the running of that business, and that's now going into a completely different type of business, and requires a lot of different personnel inside of that business. And I think they probably had a lot of complications in that acquisition. That acquisition involved them running warehouses, managing the logistics of dispatch of that freight out to all of these Shopify customers. And so I think Shopify bought that business, thought it was a great idea for their business, then quickly realized it was very complicated, had a lot of moving parts, and then quickly sold it off to Flexport. Flexport have now got it, and maybe that's something to do with that acquisition. That would have been quite a large acquisition, and Shopify are now a shareholder inside of Flexport. So I think there's a lot going on in that business. I think the founders step back in. What a founder is generally able to do is they're generally aligned to understanding what is the best decisions to make for a business, and can actually remove roadblocks very quickly. They own a decent chunk of the business, and so they're willing to actually take risks, whereas a paid CEO sometimes may not be. And maybe that's what's actually happened in this instance. So yeah, very interesting to see what's happened, and very interesting to see how this plays out, and seeing how their strategy sort of changes over the coming months.
Yeah, I mean, we know from the news perspective, the 20% layoff of staff, over 700 workers in January.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think that could have maybe contributed slightly, or is it nothing?
I think definitely. I think the business has gone from being profitable at some stage to being not profitable. I think it was probably related to the acquisition that they made. And so now they're looking at saying, hey, we still have a large amount of cash. I think they've got $1 billion of cash in the bank, so they've got a large amount of money, but we want to make that money last, and they're obviously burning quite a substantial amount of money every month. And so I think Ryan's coming there to say, hey, we need to adjust our strategy. We're going to have to cut some costs, and we're going to return back to profitability, and we're going to do that quickly. So it would not surprise me in the weeks and months ahead that we hear about further layoffs inside of that business.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's going to be painful. So one of the biggest stories as well for this week is FedEx Express. They've now signed an agreement to build a new facility at Istanbul Airport. Now, this far, it has been sharing the location at the airport, but now a new building will bring opportunities, obviously, to double their presence at the airport. It will enable FedEx actually to produce 3,000 pieces per hour to process, pardon me. I mean, that is just a significant shift from doing a certain way to automatically 3,000 pieces per hour. What do you make of this? I think this is obviously going to help them, to boost their volumes completely.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, FedEx is, renowned for, and what their business is all about is international freight. A lot of e-commerce movements actually occur through the FedEx network, and being able to move product. And so, being able to order something today from the US or from Australia or from Europe and have that delivered to your doorstep in a couple of days. And it's pretty extraordinary how, both FedEx and also DHL and UPS can actually do this. I suspect what they've been doing is they've been looking at their network, and they're seeing the amount of volume that's going in and out of Europe to other parts of the world. And maybe that's coming in from China or from other parts. And so Istanbul was a good location where they could probably cost effectively increase their facility to put through, use that as a hub to then distribute to other parts of the world. And I think with what FedEx does and what DHL does is have these hubs in different locations where they can have lots of flights coming into those areas, and then being able to then distribute and transfer that freight into different parts of the world. So yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So FedEx mentions that the new facility will actually offer separate processing for parcels and for freight. How can this approach benefit companies and customers requiring both shipping services? How will that benefit?
So I think the parcels is more sort of the smaller items. It might be the smaller shippers, but then you're also going to have sort of some of these larger companies that are moving larger amounts of freight. And so that's where that's probably going to be palletized. It's all going onto the aircraft in one go. And so, yeah, I think it's just, enabling them to be able to handle larger amounts of volume across the board.
Yeah. Then let's look at our top YouTube personality, Mr. Beast. He now faces a trademark infringement lawsuit over the product name, part of his candy brand Feastables. It's called D's Nuts. Now, there's another guy. His name is Brian Detour, and he claims that he actually came up with this name 10 years ago, but it was spelled D Nuts, not Z. And so it was inspired by his grandmother, and he believes that Mr. Beast actually stole this name from him. So they're going back to court. But you must remember there's another court case for Mr. Beast as well. But what I want to know from you, Steve, is, how do you avoid these potential trademark conflicts in a business? It's very familiar, it's very similar, and it can actually create a lot of confusion for customers.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think the first thing to note is, I think once you get to a certain scale and size, people just see you as a target, and that's why he's been sued. He's a target. They know that he's got money. He's got a big brand awareness, so people are going to target him, and lawyers will go after him to try and essentially get money. And then what they're ultimately hoping for is this is going to get settled, and Mr. Beast is just going to pay over some money. And so what's going to be really interesting is seeing how this actually plays out. And does he just settle it, or does he actually dig in and say, actually, no, I'm not going to settle this. I'm going to set a precedent for anyone else who tries to sue me. I'm going to take this all the way to court. So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, obviously when you're building a brand, you want to make sure you've done your trademark checks, and you want to make sure that you've engaged a lawyer that's going to help you to identify, has this name been used, and is there a conflict with this name, previously. And so he probably didn't go down that path, or maybe that name hadn't been used for a long time, and so the lawyer said, look, don't worry about it, we can fight this one. And so either he has or hasn't had advice. It's hard to know. But I think if you're building an e-commerce brand, having a brand that is a name that people can easily find going online, you own the domain name. I think that's really important. And so that, people don't get confused. I've seen time and time again where people have built businesses, they've chosen similar names, and, then you got to search for them and you get confused as to knowing, which business is which. And so being able to go to Google and search for your name is vital for success, because that's where, once your business starts getting going, you get the word of mouth, and then people go to Google to find you. And if they can't find you, then you're losing out on that word of mouth traffic.
Yeah. Let's say this court case actually goes ahead and he wants to set an example. What do you think? What is the potential consequences for small businesses, would you say?
I mean, I think the example, it's difficult to say. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but, I think, who knows whether there's going to be an amount of money that depending on which way the judge actually ends up, pushing this case. Is there a conflict here or not? And whether or not then there's a fine. In some instances, usually it comes down to some sort of settlement, and the judge will say, this amount of money needs to be paid to the other party, or it might be something in line with, future revenue or something along those lines. I guess it depends on how bad that infringement looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's a wrap of the e-commerce report. Thanks so much for joining us again, Steve. It doesn't look like we've got any messages from our viewers at this point, but do get in touch with us if there's anything that you want to tell us. If you want to feature on the show, get in touch with us with any of our email addresses. Thank you so much again, Steve. Any word from you?
No, that's great. It's a great week, and we'll see what next week's e-commerce news and retail news occurs.
Brilliant.